Macro photography is truly a unique style of photography, being able to take ordinary objects that you wouldn't take a second glance at and offering a different perspective on them that isn't really seen by the human eye. I just think that's freaking awesome. And being in the Sony ecosystem, there's only really one lens you go to if you want to shoot macro photography, and that is the Sony 90mm f2.8 macro lens. So that is what we are going to be talking about today. So yeah, like I said, 90mm f2.8, you get a really short focal distance on it. I believe it's around 1 foot from the sensor. So as you can tell, that is really short, which makes this a really awesome lens for getting close-ups. So obviously, it's a macro lens. The build quality is decent. It is their G line, so it's not quite a G Master. It's not a base model. So the build quality is about what you would expect. It's not perfect. It feels solid. It's got a nice aluminum style housing, no weatherproofing, but you do get a custom button on the side, whether you want to use that to toggle autofocus or hold focus or do whatever. You get a 3-state switch letting you change the focal range of the ring. It goes full, which gives you the full kind of from short to infinity. Then you get a 0.5mm to infinity, and then you get the really short, narrow 0.28 meters to half a meter. So that is a pretty cool feature to toggle how you want to adjust your focal ring. Under that, you get a switch to toggle optical steady shot on or off. For most of the stuff, you are going to want to leave OSS on because 90mm and macro, you're going to want as much stabilization as possible. So the focal ring is also pretty cool because you can slide it to toggle autofocus on or off. And when you slide it back to manual focus, you get this nice indicator ring for the 3 states to tell you what the focus is at, which is actually really convenient to have. I actually really like that on this lens. And at the front, you get a 62mm lens opening. So that is kind of the specs on this thing. Let's talk a bit more about actually using it. So the camera I paired this lens with is my Sony a7R4, and that is a really good combo considering I have like over 60 megapixels on this, plus the macro lens, and being able to really punch in and get really detailed shots is awesome. Now, I do have IBIS built into this camera as well as the OSS on the lens, so you can get by with hand-holding macro shots, even really tight ones. But if you have the ability to use a tripod, I would strongly recommend it. It will take any of that movement that you would get hand holding and eliminate it. So probably go with a tripod, but with a camera with IBIS built in as well as the OSS in this lens, you can get by with hand holding macro shots. And yeah, macro photography is hard. It is very hard. Try getting a macro shot at f2.8 on this thing. It is extremely difficult. So yeah, you'll probably want to back it down to around f10 or so. I believe this goes all the way down to f22. And as you know, as you bring down that aperture, you need more light. So if you want a really detailed shot with a wide focal range, you're probably going to need a lot of light here. So keep that in mind when doing macro photography. Whew, it's cold out there. Okay, so we talked a lot objectively about this lens. We talked about the build quality, the specs of it, and basically how most people would use it, but I haven't really spoken subjectively about it and how I personally feel about it. So let's do that. Now, I'll have you know that this is the 3rd version of this lens that I own. Remember when I said the build quality isn't perfect? Well, yeah, it's not. The first lens I owned got some debris somehow within the lens itself, which was causing spots on my photos, which really bothered me. So I sold that one and got a new one in. Well, not really a new one. I bought a used one. And with that one, the metal ring around the focal ring came off, and it looked like somebody had tried to glue it because there was glue residue all around it. So I returned that, and this is the third one. This is another used one. Luckily, this was in better shape, but just last week, that ring came off again, and I glued it back on, albeit more carefully than the last person. So it's fine now, but again, that's just something I have to report on because those are the experiences I've had with this lens. But let's talk about how it functions as a photography lens and how it functions shooting video. First off, video, I think this is decent. When I first read reviews on this lens, a lot of people were claiming this is their favorite video lens, which was awesome for me, for my YouTube channel. I thought this would be a great, dual function lens. I could use it for video and for obviously macro photography and practicing. Well, I would just say it's okay for video. I wouldn't specifically buy this for video for two reasons. One being that the focus breathing on this is awful. I mean, if you are in macro mode especially, and you're trying to rack focus between something about a foot away back to your product, the focal breathing is insane, and honestly, not even worth it in some aspects. The other reason is this is a loud lens, especially if you're using autofocus. It's not quiet. Let's put it on the camera and I will let you listen. Let's take off my Zeiss 16-35 f4. If you're interested in seeing this lens, a review on this, let me know down in the comments. Yeah, let's take a listen. Yeah, definitely not the quietest lens. So if you do filming where lens noise is an issue, then this is honestly one of the loudest lenses that I've owned. But hey, it's a macro lens. It is a macro lens first. So let's give it a fighting chance and talk about what it's supposed to do, and that is macro photography. In this case, it's pretty great. So let's jump into some actual photos and we can discuss. Now remember, outside when we took some photos of the fire pit, yeah, that is this little rock that you're looking at, and this is at f2.8. Now, f2.8 on a macro lens is extremely difficult. Just look at how much of a focal range you're dealing with. That is an extremely small focal range. Now, you can bump it up to f22, and this is the difference between f2.8 and f22. You still see that we are getting some background blur, even at f22 on the length of this little rock, which is crazy. Luckily, this was outside, so we had enough light to get a decent photo here. But like I said before, if you're doing macro photography inside and you need to step down to around f22, high teens, maybe f16 or something, make sure you have a lot of light. Again, taking a look at this photo, this is f22. Even at f22 on this grill sign, which is probably about 3 inches long, you're getting about an inch worth of focal range on here before it starts to blur. Again, that is just crazy for a lens. So know what you're getting into with a macro lens like this. Now, just because it's a macro lens doesn't mean you have to do macro photography. It does do fairly decent with street photography and portraits. Recently, I took this to visit my fiance's family up in New York and messed around with it and got some pretty decent photos. I mean, this is just one of my absolute favorites. And this is, a fairly decent photo. It's very sharp. I mean, this was with my old A7 III as well. So you are getting crazy detail all the way punched in. It's a decent all-around lens. And obviously I tried some macro photography over there. This B, I think I took about 20 attempts to get a decent shot of it. And I think it came out pretty decent. So depending on what you want to use it for, obviously it's macro first, but don't think you just have to use it as a macro photography lens. I mean, I know we said it's not the best for video, but that doesn't mean it's not usable. It's certainly usable for getting certain shots, especially with the OSS built in. You can handhold it even at 90 millimeters and still get some decent shots out of it. So again, I think it's a great lens. Now it comes in at a retail price of $1,100, but on the used market, which is probably where you'll want to find one of these, you can get it for around $800 to $900. And at that price, depending on your use case, I think this is a fantastic lens. In the hands of somebody more capable than myself, I don't doubt that this will be a fantastic lens that you can get amazing shots out of. Another thing to note is that this lens was released in March of 2015, meaning that it is now 7 years old, which with camera lenses, it's not like Call of Duty or an STD, you don't get a new one every year, but 7 years is pushing it to where we may see a new model of this, maybe a G Master version. So, keep that in mind if you're doing some shopping around for macro lenses, but if you have the cash to spend on it, I can recommend this for $800 to $900, especially if your goal is to do macro photography. But that is it. That is my thoughts on the lens. If you like this video, be sure to drop a like. If you have suggestions for any videos in the future, I am all ears. Let me know down in the comments what you'd like to see, but that is it. I will see you guys in the next one.